Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the 1000-year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to follow. As we hurtled towards the epic final battle of Bleach, the scene was set for an incredible clash of the Titans. Yhwach, having consumed the remains of his father, the Soul King, and attaining an almost godlike power at the same time, returned to the Soul Society to begin the process of annihilating it and the other worlds that make up the Bleach universe. Only there was a problem standing in his way. Someone was there waiting for him. Still strapped to his chair, Aizen smugly welcomes Yhwach to his Soul Society, effectively declaring it under his protection at the same time. Yhwach grins broadly in response. Although I presume he could have just left Aizen there and gone about his business, the Quincy warlord is hardly one to forego a challenge, and instead unleashes a torrent of black energy at a defenseless Aizen, perhaps hoping to obliterate him in one go. Unfortunately for Yhwach, the attack does little to faze his enemy. Instead, it merely frees him from his bindings, decimating Aizen's chair in one blast. Standing tall, Aizen lifts his arms, an earth-shaking tremor of Reiatsu barreling through the air as he announces his intention to stop Yhwach in his tracks. What I've just told you is the setup for the final battle of Bleach itself, and while I want to do an in-depth video on that fight at some point in the future, this is not that video. Instead, we're going to be asking a question. If the fate of the world depended on it, could Aizen have defeated Yhwach on his own here in this very moment? Of course, in the source material, it's not quite that simple. Ichigo and Renji are on their way to the battlefield, and unbeknownst to everyone, Uryu is also making his way there, carrying the key to defeating Yhwach. And so it's up to Aizen to keep the Quincy King occupied until then. But what if things were different? What if Ichigo and Renji had both been killed by Yhwach back in Varvelt? What if for some reason Uryu never made it? Does Aizen have what it takes to do what he always wanted and kill the Soul King? But before we get started on the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video, once you're done with it, make sure to give it a thumbs up to help support me and the channel. And if you want to take that support for me another step further, I do also have a Patreon as well. And as always, an enormous shout out and a massive everlasting thank you goes out to each and every one of you supporting me over there on Patreon. I really do appreciate it. Now, I appreciate that was a bit of a loaded question. Obviously, this isn't the same Soul King that Aizen originally had his sights set on. Still, it's interesting nonetheless. Yhwach has essentially done exactly what Aizen wanted to do: slay Reo and take his place atop the empty throne of the world. There's a lot to consider here. Although Aizen doesn't exhibit any of the transformations or abilities the Hogyoku once bestowed upon him, it is still fused with him, making him effectively immortal. At the same time, Yhwach's the Almighty is the single most broken power in Bleach, allowing him to not only see the future, but change it to his liking as well. How do you defeat someone who can see and alter your every move? But conversely, what does that matter if you can't actually kill your enemy? If we consider that Aizen is fighting Yhwach on his own for the vast majority of that final battle, then it puts into perspective how well he might do against the Quincy King on the whole. With that in mind, let's take a look at how the fight between the two of them actually plays out and go from there. Although the battle between the two most gargantuan villains of Bleach is criminally short, it is laden with information and interesting tidbits for us to pick apart. Beginning with that initial setup I mentioned earlier, there's already key factors here to discuss. For starters, a little earlier in the arc, Aizen attempts to free himself from his chair by striking it point blank with a fully powered Hado 90 Kuro Hitsugi. An ability so strong, it vaporizes the entirety of the Shinigami's current stronghold, the debris around it, and the remnants of the Soul King's Reiatsu that at that time threatened to devour the Gotei 13 themselves. Despite that, the chair itself somehow remained intact, supposedly the zenith of the Soul Society's technological capabilities. Aizen himself even remarked how impressive it actually was, and yet, as soon as he comes face to face with Yhwach, the Quincy King effortlessly demolishes the chair with a single pillar of power. Just Kubo's artwork itself on show here paints a staggering picture. The blast unleashed by Yhwach towers over the very buildings of Seirete, and it seemed to be conjured as easily as by waving his hand. And yet despite this, Aizen is unharmed. As the smoke clears from the strike, the former captain stands, merely thanking Yhwach for freeing him as he shrugs off the tattered remains of the bindings that once strapped him down. Considering Aizen was literally bound to the chair itself, it seems unlikely there was any way for him to avoid or mitigate the attack. Instead, he must have taken it head on. Maybe the chair was destroyed in an instant, in a flash, immediately, giving Aizen a precious split second to leap away and avoid the majority of the blast. But either way, it's remarkable. Aizen then releases his suffocatingly powerful spiritual pressure as he swaggers towards Yhwach. Remember, Yhwach himself placed Aizen on the list of the special war powers due to his Reiatsu, so what we're seeing here is exactly what Yhwach was once cautious of. Reiatsu strong enough that Aizen believed he was capable of shooting the royal palace itself out of the sky. Of course, the context around the special war powers is important and uncertain. Considering their abilities were in the daton provided by Yhwach to his soldiers, it seems likely to me that Yhwach himself wasn't necessarily concerned with facing them in a 1v1 capacity, but it was more for the benefit of the individual sternritter. Either way, the Yhwach that created the daton in the first place is a far cry from this new divine version. As Ichigo and Renji seemingly arrive on the battlefield, Yhwach the Almighty activates, allowing him to see what they're all going to do before they even do it. However, Aizen has one enormous advantage on his side apart from his immortality: Kyoka Suigetsu. Having placed Yhwach under the spell of complete hypnosis back in the first Quincy invasion, Aizen's Zanpakuto is perfectly suited to confound and obfuscate Yhwach's powers of foresight, meaning he is perhaps the one character capable of actually battling it out with Yhwach even when the Almighty is active. As long as Yhwach doesn't catch wind that Aizen has messed with his senses, he will have no idea that something is wrong. Aizen is able to warp what Yhwach sees with his all-seeing gaze, meaning the futures that Yhwach is witnessing are completely wrong, and Aizen can disguise himself with Kyoka Suigetsu and get away with it. Essentially, to cut a long story short, Yhwach's eyes are fixated upon something else, something false, giving Aizen free rein to do whatever he likes in the background. So it's clear then that Aizen has a lot going for him, maybe even more than any other single individual fighter. Other characters might be more physically powerful, more intelligent, more resourceful, or, like Ichigo, just have an impossibly deep well of latent power to draw from, but Aizen kind of has it all in a way. Not only is he immortal, but his Zanpakuto is the one and only real counter to the Almighty, it seems. Plus, Aizen is a Kido master, utilising Hado 99 effortlessly against Yhwach, and he at least has the raw power necessary to overcome practically the entire Gotei 13 himself. But is it enough? If we circle back to the question asked at the very beginning of this video, can Aizen defeat Yhwach all on his own? Well, to be honest, probably not. The thing is, Yhwach has all of that at his disposal as well, and almost certainly more. Aizen might be immortal, but as long as he has access to his power of the Almighty, so too is Yhwach, as we see him even able to rewrite futures in which he's actually already been killed. Even if he had no idea that he was about to be killed, he can still somehow save himself in the future. Not only that, but even with Kyoka Suigetsu, I feel like Kubo makes it pretty clear to us that Aizen is absolutely on the ropes, trying to engineer a scenario where they can actually get the drop on Yhwach. Aizen might be immortal, but he's absolutely not immune to damage, and Yhwach tears off one of Aizen's arms and punches a hole through his chest before Ichigo finally manages to land his all-crucial strike. Even if Aizen was able to put his all into it and land a hit on Yhwach, it seems unlikely to me that he would be able to muster all that strength in one go necessary to kill the Quincy King in a single hit, which is clearly what they were going for, as they couldn't afford anything less. A point-blank Getsuga Tensho from Ichigo's true bankai, activated from within Yhwach's own body itself, is enough to wipe the Quincy King out. Can Aizen do anything like that? Of course, this is all speculation on my part, but, that's what's fun about it. Even if, in his current state, Aizen could reach that level of power for one single attack, Yhwach would simply revive himself as we saw him do after Ichigo's attack, and the battle would continue anew. On top of that, Yhwach reviving himself not only seems to have no detrimental effect on his power, outside of the fact his body has to rebuild itself from this messy pool of Ryoryoku again, but if anything, he unleashes more power in that moment than we'd ever seen before. One of the most underrepresented things about the final battle that I really love is the sheer scale of what actually ends up taking place. It's kind of crazy, but the moments of largest scope in this fight seem to happen in the smallest, most cramped of panels. But as Yhwach gathers his power, we see it completely envelop the Shakon Maku itself, even bursting through the top of it and beginning to rupture the very earth of the surrounding Rukongai and beyond. To put it bluntly, in this form, Yhwach has the power to split the world apart, and we get to see the beginnings of that. So, going back to the fight at hand, what we're mostly seeing is Aizen putting up a fight on all fronts, trying to stall Yhwach as best he can. It's actually very impressive, and I think this is one of the greatest showings of Kyoka Suigetsu we ever see. Aizen manufactures almost an entirely false battle scenario revolving around Yhwach as a focal point, involving himself here and there, but at different points and as different people. At one point early in the fight, another of Yhwach's colossal energy blasts actually splits the Sokyoku Hill in two. And again, this is all so casual. As a small side note, I love that Kubo actually reduces the Seirei-tei to dust and rubble like this, but I wish we'd been able to linger on the destruction a little more. There is one key element that we don't get a firm answer for, unfortunately, and that's the reason why Kyoka Suigetsu's effect eventually wears off. When Yhwach rams his hand through the false Ichigo's chest and begins collapsing the Soul Society around him, Aizen reveals himself and the truth of what's been going on. But why? Sure, narratively speaking, it's an amazing moment and a brilliant gotcha, but it also negates Aizen's advantage. I think there's a few reasons for this. Firstly, when Ichigo stabbed Yhwach through the back, how would that affect the illusion, if at all? Would Yhwach immediately be able to realise he'd been fooled, or would Aizen have been able to keep things up? Maybe he'd have made it so it looked like he was the one to stab Yhwach from behind, as Ichigo was still being killed in front of him. The only issue is that presumably Yhwach would have been able to sense it was Ichigo's Reiatsu, not Aizen's, that had just impaled him. Interestingly, whenever Aizen attacks someone after just using Kyoka Suigetsu to confuse them, it does seem to end the illusion. When he strikes Harabel, the truth is revealed, and the same goes for when he attacks Izuru and Iba. But of course, that could just as easily be Kubo revealing Aizen in those moments for dramatic effect. I don't think the illusion necessarily has to end at all. I'm trying to think of the different moments Aizen uses his power to actually attack someone in the source material. The other two possible reasons are actually mentioned by Yhwach himself. After the real Ichigo lands a successful attack, Yhwach's body kind of just splatters onto the floor, transforming into pure power, it seems. Both Ichigo and Aizen seem to think the fight is won, and as Yhwach reappears ensnaring Aizen in his black form, the Quincy King notes that Kyokusuigetsu has been undone, before questioning whether it was due to overconfidence, or if Aizen himself has simply run out of strength. This is a key distinction, and without a firm answer, speculating on Aizen's ultimate fate in a 1v1 battle with Yhwach is difficult. If Kyokusuigetsu was shut off due to Aizen's failing strength, which is highly possible after the serious wounds he's sustained, then Aizen ultimately doesn't stand a chance. Yhwach will keep reviving until eventually Aizen is just unable to fight back. Again, even if Aizen is immortal, it doesn't stop his body from being reduced to a pulp. That being said, if Aizen merely switched off Kyokusuigetsu's effect due to being overconfident and thinking they had won, then that changes things a little bit, but perhaps not enough in the grand scheme of things. It does bring into question just how long Aizen would be able to keep on fighting. Ultimately, however, even with every chance afforded to him, while Aizen might be able to do some potentially serious damage to Yhwach on his own, I think victory is impossible for him. After all, Yhwach's downfall doesn't come from any of the fighters gathered here, but from Uryu's timely arrival and the arrow created by his father. Even though they hadn't communicated in advance at all, Aizen, working in tandem with Ichigo, set everything up to land a killing blow on Yhwach against all odds, and by putting everything on the line, they succeeded. To me, that's perhaps another reason why Aizen reveals himself, because he's well aware this move, this strike, this combo is their final gambit. It is them putting everything on the line, so at this point, it doesn't matter if Yhwach knows the truth or not. But even that wasn't enough in the end. The entire final battle is one complex, strategic dance designed to engineer Yhwach into a position where he can't escape, and then Ichigo's immense power finishes the job. However, the Almighty is just too broken to be defeated. Where Aizen's immortality doesn't protect his physical body, Yhwach's does, as it completely rebuilds his form from scratch, essentially. So, without the intervention of Uryu and the still silver arrow to strip Yhwach of the Almighty, it seems Aizen is doomed to lose to Yhwach no matter what. Maybe he has a bankai yet that he can still use if things get really dire, but since we have no idea, it's hard to really involve it. However, there is one question remaining regarding Aizen defeating Yhwach. What kind of influence does the Hogyoku still have over Aizen's body? I just mentioned that Aizen's immortality doesn't protect his physical body, and while that's true from the standpoint of him taking various injuries as we see in this very fight, what about if he actually died? We can assume from the end of Deicide that the Hogyoku has retreated somewhat, and although it remains within Aizen, keeping him eternally alive, is it still attempting to enforce its will through Aizen's own? Putting it simply, if Yhwach was to kill Aizen, would he regenerate into a new form? The Hogyoku has already taken Aizen through the entire process of becoming transcendent once before. It has already broken down his soul and reforged him. Considering Aizen has only grown more powerful during his time in Muken, would the Hogyoku still have that kind of effect? If, say, Yhwach blew Aizen's body apart a bit like Gin's bankai did to him, what would actually happen next? Would the Hogyoku force a transformation upon Aizen, turning him into a monster again? Or would it simply put his body back together the way it once was? Or would it do neither of those things, and really we have no idea? The Hogyoku was only really forcing transformations upon him because it was Aizen's desire at that point in time to evolve beyond the dimensions of a regular Shinigami and Hollow. And then the Hogyoku exacerbated its efforts. It dramatically kept doing so because it was trying to grant what it believed Aizen wanted, even to an extreme degree, to the point where Aizen himself thought it was the Hogyoku's own will that Aizen shouldn't lose to Ichigo. If the Hogyoku has become a more passive force in Aizen's life, what does that mean for his power? Either way, I do think Yhwach would completely overwhelm and overpower Aizen in a straight match of brute, physical force, if that's what it really came down to in the end, as we see when they briefly clash in battle. And eventually Yhwach could just pluck all of Aizen's limbs from his body, apparently effortlessly, before moving on with his goal. Remember, Yhwach's goal was to annihilate the Soul Society, and he very nearly succeeded in the midst of this battle. Aizen revealed his trump card on the cusp of oblivion, essentially playing his entire hand in that moment because he had no choice. It was now or never. And even then, he failed to totally stop his enemy. As much as I think Aizen is capable of putting up a solid fight, perhaps more so than really anybody else on their own, I think what Kubo was trying to show with this fight was that it couldn't have ended any other way than with the help of Uryu and the vengeful souls of those who Yhwach had killed in the past. But that's it for the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think about the outcome of this fight? Could Aizen, as he is here in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, have defeated Yhwach, this godly, Soul King-enhanced version of the Quincy King, right here at the very end of the story, if push came to shove? If it came down to it, if Aizen was the last bastion of defense for the universe of Bleach, would he have been able to pull it off or not? Personally, I don't think he would have been able to, though I do think he might have been able to press Yhwach for at least a decent fight. But do let me know your thoughts in the comments below, guys. I'd absolutely love to hear them. Make sure to hit subscribe if you haven't done already, and give the video a thumbs up. And until next time, I'll catch you later. And I'll see you then.